Well, I want to welcome everyone to the 47-minute webinar, first one of the year. Happy 2025 to everybody. We have a really cool opportunity to start off with a very special guest. You've probably seen it on some of the content when you signed up to join this, but Eva Daniel was so generous to join us for our 47-minute webinar. She's the founder of the Speak Shop, and Eva helps people speak really well. If you have a talk, if you have communication, maybe a keynote or whatever, she can help. So what I'll do a little descriptor, and then I'll let Eva speak for herself. But for around 20 years, a couple decades, Eva's helped some of the nation's top authors, speakers, executive leaders create and deliver their content. It's been heard and viewed by millions, and lots of different mediums: radio, podcast, YouTube, live streams, and of course, like in-person keynotes, in-person talks. And in the Speak Shop, Eva offers one-on-one consulting, team consulting, workshops. And this isn't noted in on the website necessarily, but I think Eva would be a great person if you want to expand your LinkedIn brand. She does so good with LinkedIn marketing, and just her presence there is really strong. So want to welcome Eva. Eva, do you want to say anything more about the Speak Shop, or just some of your prior experience? I didn't want to name drop for you. I certainly could, but you just want to let everyone know a little bit about you as well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Aaron, for that kind introduction. It's so nice to meet all of you here today. I think that my parents are still pretty amazed that I've made a career talking about talking. As a kid, I always talked a lot, and so I still feel vindicated now in my 40s that I'm like, wow, we're making a living doing this thing. But as Aaron just said there, I love coming alongside people and just helping give you confidence in both your content of what you're saying, and then being on the stage, how you're delivering it. And I always just say public speaking is a skill just like any other. It's learned. We all are different stages of our journey. We're all different spots in our learning process. And so sometimes I think that we can see these, iconic or these big speakers on the stage, whether that's, Oprah, or if that's Dave Ramsey, who I used to write for, or if it's Patrick Lencioni or John Maxwell or anyone Tony Robbins, anyone that you like. We can see these big speakers on the stage and think like, oh, wow, like they were born with it, or I can never be that good. But the difference between them and you oftentimes is just a handful of practical things, and is also just practice, like getting in the reps. Those people have just gotten a lot more experience. They put a lot more time in it than you and I have. And so we can all learn and grow in this area. And so that's just really what I'm passionate about is taking principles that I see on these big stages from big speakers and just bring them down the reality for the rest of us in our Tuesday afternoon meetings, or if we are speaking at an industry event or at a conference.
Thank you. And I had the pleasure of meeting Eva at a conference, and so that's where we first got connected.
Yeah, and we put you on the spot, Aaron, as I recall, more than once.
Yeah, and clearly exposed my need for a speaking coach. Be put on the spot in front of a group of people. And well, one of the things I learned, like when I found out that you've helped Dave Ramsey craft some of his speeches and hone the edges, and I'm a huge Dave Ramsey fan. The financial piece is very formative of my own personal financial life, but the idea, like, oh, he has people help him with his communication, I just never thought of before. So is that, some of those big names that you mentioned, the Tonys or John Maxwell's, is it common for people to have a speaking coach if they're up there on the regular in front of those big crowds?
It really is. And I think that's another thing to keep in mind too. A lot of these speakers, they have people designing their slide decks or helping with content, all these pieces. But I've really found that I think this is true not just on public speaking. This can be true in all areas of your life. You can read books and you can take courses and you can ask friends for advice and you can hustle it yourself and you can get to the point of being really good at anything, but oftentimes kind of really making that jump from good to great, whether it's in speaking or in your business or your fitness or anything else. Oftentimes you don't really know what it is that's like holding you back from really like making that jump. I always tell my potential clients, I'm a professional feedback giver. I'm the one that comes in and says things like, hey, your 5 to 7 minute mark in your talk is really dry. You need some humor, maybe something like this. Or wow, what you have the 17-minute mark, that should be the opening of your talk, but you actually need to start that story later. Oh no, now there's a hole. What's going to go over here? Sometimes it's just rearranging pieces. And then on the delivery side, sometimes we all have these filler words or nervous tics. Maybe we're just constantly fiddling with our blazer or twirling our hair or pacing or doing something distracting. We may or may not be aware of that. And oftentimes it just takes an outsider's perspective, an outsider's eyes, a coach's perspective to say, hey, if you were to make these small changes, you're going to be able to go from here up to here. I have seen, though, pretty repeatedly, most people that you see have hired a coach at some point in their life in terms of those really top tier speakers.
Yeah, I think that's good to know. And I think that it's kind of disarming too, because the nature, being a consultant myself, the nature of things is like if you to suggest a speaking coach or consultant is it can be often translated as like, wait, are you saying I'm not good at that already or on my own? It can be easy to get defensive and like, well, but to hear like, oh, even some of those top tier guys are still having speaking coaches. Just like in the fitness world, bodybuilders have their personal trainer. It's like, why would they need a personal trainer? They're like the best in the world, but yeah, that strive for excellence. So just for everyone, we're going to, when I was talking with Eva about how the format for today, we're just going to be doing some Q&A, so more conversational style content. So if you have questions for Eva specifically, feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll have some time to look at those and answer those questions specifically. I'm going to start off with a question that I wrote down. And so Eva, you've got a lot of experience evaluating a lot of speeches, getting to experience them live, whether they're your clients or not. What are like one or two top factors that just or qualities of a speech that just make it really great?
One of them is storytelling and telling stories. Stories make our content stick. There is loads of research about storytelling. One that's pretty consistent is that when wrapped in a story, we're 6 to 7 times more likely to remember the content. And so, one of the things that can really start distinguishing you as a speaker is telling more stories. But I have to give the caveat here. A lot of times we think that we're telling stories when all we've actually done is give a linear list of facts of what happened. A happened, and then B happened, and then C happened. So bring this to life. Can I put you on the spot?
Again? Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay, so just would you briefly share with us how you met your spouse?
Oh, oh my. So how I met my spouse, I'd just taken a new job and it involved higher education. And at the end of a day of work, I was still I was still on point, and these three girls walked in. And one of them in particular captured my attention and imagination. And her name was Marva. And it was who she was with, what she was wearing, and what they were doing. And I wondered, would I ever have a chance to meet her? And I did. And we got married, and that was my first wife, 46 years ago.
Okay, so let's just pretend all for a second that Kent was going to be giving a speech to singles about how they too can meet the love of their life. But let's just say that Kent wanted to use a story in a speech. Well, what he did there overall, like we did have some, we got one thing I want to point out, one reason why telling stories is such a good thing to do. We saw Kent kind of light up. Granted, we asked him, I asked him a question about something that he's devoted 46 years of life to. So we knew it was going to kind of prompt some emotion there. But if Kent was going to use a story in a speech, what would he do? Like how would you shape something like that in a story? Well, he would list out, okay, all the facts of what happened. He gave us a lot of facts. It was a new job. It was in higher ed. Three girls walked in. One of them caught his eye. And then, we kind of fast forward through a lot of details. But let's say we wanted to make that into 2 to 3 minute story in a speech. What we'd want to do is adding in some of the feelings of, well, what did you feel when that happened? What did you think when that happened? What were your five senses doing? What did you see, hear, taste, smell, touch? And a really, really big question is, where should you start your story? Oftentimes, when we're thinking about shaping up a story for a speech, especially when it comes to an open or a close of your speech, which are the most impactful parts of your entire presentation, is to consider starting with a cold open right in the middle. So for this example, Ken is shaping this into story. He might want to say, okay, this is me trying to do math. That would have been 1988, 78, 76.
78. That's when we got married. Yeah.
78, 76. Okay. So, maybe he's starting, it's 1976 and I'm on the campus of, give the name of the university, give what the job was, give a little bit more of the scope. You did a great job saying your first wife's name there, Marva. But giving some of those details and start shaping it into story. And then always asking your story, does it need some heart? Does it need some humor? How can we expand this out? So we don't really know a lot. Is Marva, is she Brazilian, 6 foot tall, or is she a short, chubby blonde? Like, we don't know those details. So adding in some of those details brings us into the story by adding some of those descriptive details. So that was a really long way of answering your question, Erin, but one of the number one things you can do to level up your speaking is to tell more stories. Learn the art of storytelling. If you look at some of those most iconic speakers, you're going to start seeing a pattern. Some of the things that they do, they're working on their thought leadership all the time. They're building that personal brand on LinkedIn, on podcasts and articles, the books they're writing. That's, of course, there's no shortcut to the thought leadership work and doing the work of really identifying, like, what is your message? What are you saying? But then storytelling. Oh, if you can master the art of storytelling, you can master the stage.
That's great. Let me throw another question out at you, and it's the opposite. Is there any just killer, like speech killer? Like, if there's one thing I shouldn't be doing when communicating or giving a talk, like, Erin, please don't do this, fill in the blank.
One of the biggest mistakes I see is people trying to cram way too much content into their speech. Instead of going, an inch wide and a mile deep and having everyone leave your message with clarity, knowing what it was about, knowing what they should do with it, they try to cover way too many topics. This can especially happen, I've noticed a lot of times, if you do get in a spot where you're maybe writing a book, or maybe there are 6 steps or 9 steps or 12 things you want people to know. It's too much to cover. It's just too much to cover. So too much content is one of the greatest things holding speeches back. And too much content can kind of manifest itself in a few ways. One, everything you're saying becomes more shallow because you're not able to unpack it as much. It can also make you, from a delivery perspective, start rushing through that content. You start talking fast because you have so much to cover, or you just don't go as in depth as you could. And so one of the big things is just keep in mind, go deeper on less. And it's really, really hard, especially, even just in a few days from now on Saturday, I'm going to be speaking myself to a group of college students down in Florida. I was asked to speak, about public speaking, talking about talking. And even I'm looking at my content going, oh, I have an hour and I need to make it interactive and there needs to be things. And well, everybody needs to know all of this about public speaking. Do they? Do they really need to know all that? Well, yeah, they do. But really, starting out, college students, they actually if they can just master these 3 or 4 skills, that's what they really need to learn. And so just asking of yourself, do I realistically have the right amount of content for the time that I have? And this is true whether you have a 5-minute pitch or you're doing a 90-minute, keynote of some kind, but just really asking realistically, am I going to the depth I need to go on my topic? And am I trying to cover too much? And if you're like most of us, you're probably trying to cover too much. Very few people have too little content. And if you're like, oh, but I'm the type of person, I never have enough to say, I don't know how to fill the time. To me, that might be an indicator that you need to do a little bit more thought leadership work around your subject or your expertise, because like most of us, once you start nerding out on whatever your area of expertise is, you could just go on forever. So if you are feeling like, oh, but I don't have enough, maybe you need to do more research and figure out, well, what is a piece that you really want to expand out?
Yeah, that's when I was a youth pastor, specifically with my middle school team. We had read a book on communication and decided, instead of doing 3-point sermons, to do a 1-point sermon. And we also changed our time length from 30 minutes down to 18 to 20. And so having that focus, I was a little skeptical of, because I'm like, man, I don't know if we can communicate the quality in a shorter time with just one point as longer time and more points. But what we found was that the big idea stuck better when it was just a big idea instead of three big ideas, and proved to be really, really beneficial. I wish I had had that advice long before when I had first got it.
Well, and it's what makes TED Talk so popular because it's the same thing. It's, that 12 to 18 minutes and the one big idea. And so now, Aaron, now that you know how to do this, when's your TED Talk? We're all going to come.
We'll get to that a little bit
You
later.
just dust off one of those old sermons, bring it back up, see how it works.
Okay. Hey, Jeff wrote a question in regards to storytelling. Do you tell the entire story up front, or do you tell it throughout the speech, or does it depend on what you're covering and who the audience is?
Great question, Jeff. It depends on who the audience is. I would say one of the big things with storytelling is at some point, you do need to land every plane that you launched. I jokingly say years ago, I heard a speaker who had the most incredible story about she opened being at the side of her mom's hospital bed with her mom dying of cancer. I still don't know if her mom died, like, because the story loop was never finished. And I was like, well, did she die? Did she die? So one thing to keep in mind, no matter how you tell your story, you need to make sure you close every story loop. Or if you're setting things up, like let's just go back to Kent's story for a second. Well, do the other two girls that his wife were with have any sort of significance or not? That's a little bit of a story loop he left. It's like, well, were they friends? Did they end up being in the wedding? Are they totally irrelevant? Maybe they didn't even make the way we shaped the story to begin with, because it leaves a little bit of hanging threads. That being said, what can be very effective is if you're opening your speech with a story, which I do recommend. Oftentimes, the closing of your speech, it can work really, really well to book in that story, to close that story loop, or to give a different facet of the same story. So, for example, Kent's scenario, let's just say he opens a story about, how he met his wife. Maybe his close, maybe there's a different story about something that he would learn at something else he would learn at that higher ed role or the new job. Like, so maybe it's a new story, but it still kind of ties together the open. Sometimes it's a true, bookend. You leave it hanging, you pick it up at the end. Sometimes, as you mentioned, sometimes it works really well to weave that story throughout the speech. Oftentimes, it really can depend on your topic. So some speeches obviously are personal narrative based. Maybe even you're giving a testimony at a church, or you have a really long, big story that you're going to weave through. I do always like to tell my clients, though, that most speeches, most of the time, can only carry the weight of one heavier or big story. So maybe you have the circumstance in your life where you actually did lose your mom to cancer in that deathbed, and then you got in a bad car wreck, and then you had a miscarriage, and then you got fired from your job, and maybe you had this whole litany of challenging circumstances. It might be too much weight for the audience to hold the weight of all of those stories. So you might want to pick out one piece that you camp out longer, and then maybe you give an overview of the others. But just keeping in mind, stories make your content stick if they're well constructed and well organized within your speech. As a general rule, though, I do always recommend starting with a story and ending with a story when possible on speeches, because those are the most impactful parts of your presentation.
I think that's worth its weight in gold. Jeff, you taking notes? Is that what you're? Hey, for everyone on the call, I don't know if you have Jeff on your screen, but he's a highly effective executive leader, and he's here taking notes. Love it. Leaders are learners. Kent, I know you may have had a question or two for Eva. You want to throw yours out there?
Yes. Well, so first of all, I have to tell you a little bit. This was a little sensitive, because when I first realized you were going to be on the 47-minute webinar, I saw this thing that says your speech needs spark. And so I said to myself, well, Aaron must have been talking to Eva, because obviously my speech needs spark. So I'm here to pick up on the spark. What are, we've talked a lot about story. What are some components to useful spark, to add spark? What are, 2 or 3 tips that can help with that?
Absolutely. Well, I created Spark and it's an acronym. So it's a way to organize your speech and to think through even what elements need to go in my speech and how do I organize my thoughts. So this is the way you're outlining, you're organizing your speech, but these are also crucial pieces to have in your speech. So the S is just story. Start with a story. It could also be a startling stat or a statement. I would say as a default, starting with a story is a really effective way to open. As you said, we've already talked about storytelling. P, problem. What problem does your speech solve? Oftentimes, when we're giving a presentation, whether this is even if this is just at work and we're giving the update about the CRM software that we need to give, we don't give enough reasoning for like making the audience want to crave the solution that we have. Like, our team excited about the new CRM software? We just like rush towards what we're doing. What is the problem? The problem that your audience feels, what's in it for them? Why should they care? What problem does your speech solve? Every speech needs to solve a problem. What actions? What is your solution to the problem? Maybe you have one, maybe you have a whole framework. I always say iconic speeches, signature speeches, you want to consider what is your system, strategy, or framework. For example, any one of us on this call could give a great speech about habits. We are all here in January learning about public speaking. We all have good habits. But Stephen Covey, several decades ago said, hey, there's 7 habits of highly effective people. More recently, James Clear said atomic habits. So I always like to challenge people. What are your atomic habits? What are your 7 steps? Mine, I'm sharing, it's a Spark framework, but what is yours? So when you think of those actions, those solutions you want to take, how can you create your solutions in a little bit more of a sticky, memorable way? R, resolving any loose ends, landing every plane you launch. Also, I always, and this is one of my hot takes, my strongly held opinions as a speech coach, is never end your talk on a Q&A. And this is why. If you end your talk on a Q&A, you have given the power of your ending the most significant part of your speech, the last impression your audience will have on you, to the last question asker. What if they ask a bad question? Years ago, I was running a youth event when I was at Ramsey Solutions. The audience was literally full of teenagers, and Dave took Q&A. Teenagers are popping up with all the questions. How do I save for my first car? How do I go to college debt free? How do I get a job? All the things you'd expect teenagers to ask. There is one gentleman probably in his late 70s. Why he's at the audience, we don't know. He lines up, he's the very last question, and he asks a super nuanced question about a Roth IRA 401k conversion. Not applicable to anyone in the audience but him. But people ask dumb questions all the time. People ask questions that only apply to them. They don't have that self-awareness to think, gee, is this question going to fit everybody? I'll save it for the speaker after. And you don't have control as a speaker over what the last question ask is. So I love Q&A. I think it's a great way to engage your audience. I think it's a great way to pull people in. Just don't end your talk on one. So if you are going to take Q&A, take it towards the end, but not at the end. Resolve the questions that your audience has. Answer them. I always say too on Q&A, do you like taking Q&A? If you like taking Q&A, take it. I love taking Q&A. I could do this all day long. Some people don't like taking Q&A. If you don't like Q&A, just because they've been organized or asked, don't take it. Just say, I believe my prepared content is better than the Q&A I could provide. I'd really love to spend my focus time there, but I'll be happy to stay around afterwards. But you need to resolve any lingering pieces of your speech. And then K, knockout. You want to have a memorable, impactful close. Oftentimes that is, as we just talked about with Jeff, it's that bookend to the story. If you're in the nonprofit space, a really extremely effective close can be just writing down, I imagine a world in which ... And let your mind go crazy. Write it out. Think, if everyone were to apply what you did, if everybody were to give to your nonprofit, what kind of world can you see in 5 years or in 50 years or in 100 years when none of us are here? What kind of world could that be? Paint that picture of the world in which you imagine. That can be a very effective closing for a speech. Oftentimes, asking a really pivotal question or making a really strong statement can be an effective close. Sometimes, sharing a story of someone who applied your actions can be a really effective close. But so one of the best ways to, create spark, even just from what I just shared, is to have an order to your content. a lot of times clients will reach out to me, even speakers that command rates of, $20, $30, $40,000, and their talks are all over the place. And I'll be like, well, why did you arrange it this way? And it's like, well, I don't know. And most of us just arrange our speech content as it came to us. Like, we know we're giving a presentation on Wednesday afternoon about the new CRM software, and we just started talking about some of the features. And then, but we didn't even think like, oh, am I building up all the features to be the big crescendo? Or like, why did I even put these things on this piece of paper in the order that I did? A lot of times it's just the way it came to us, and we didn't even think through the order. So one of the things is like, knowing what the point of your speech is. Can you say what the point of your speech is in one clear, crisp sentence, and then building the rest about it? But have some flow, have some structure, and that's going to start really elevating up all of your content and everything that you say.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and then because sometimes I get so excited about content that I forget about delivery. And the reason why is because a lot of times what I have seen professionally, what people perceive as delivery challenges, maybe you have a lot of filler words on the stage, you don't know what to do with your hands, you get really nervous. A lot of those are directly tied to the content. You're not clear on what you're trying to say. You haven't organized it. You haven't layered in stories or humor. And so that's why I always focus content first. But on the delivery side, a few ways you can add a little bit more spark on your delivery side is that when you go onto the stage, I say to intentionally ground yourself in the first minute. What I mean by that is you're going to confidently walk out to wherever you're speaking. You're going to plant your feet shoulder width apart. You're going to drop your shoulders. You're going to open up your arms and your smile because you're so glad to be here. You're going to show people your palms in your first minute of speaking because people are more trusting when they see your palms. That goes for Zoom calls as well. Hi, guys. So good to see you. We're more trusting when we can see people's palms. But when after you've grounded yourself in that first minute, hold eye contact longer. A lot of us, we were making eye contact, we were actually flittering around all the place. I want you to hold one full thought with someone to complete that idea before you move on to the next person that you're going to hold the idea with. And then you're going to move on to someone else that you hold the idea with. You want to command the room with your eye contact and your presence.
Man, talk about practical takeaways.
Yeah.
If it's not practical, it's not helpful.
Well, and I feel like I have an unfair advantage out of most everyone on the call because I've heard some of this and have been taking notes from Eva. I did drop in the comments the SPARK acronym. If anyone wants it there, I was taking notes. Just in full transparency, the 47-minute webinar, we had a template that we used to do, and Eva, I don't know if it was at the Outcomes Conference breakout or maybe something that you posted on LinkedIn about the Q&A, not having that at the end, because in our webinars, we'd always save that till the end. And so I heard you talk about that and I go, oh my goodness, I do that in webinar. And so
Webinars is a little bit tougher though because it is interview based. So how can you not end on a Q&A? There is a little of that. But one thing that you can do is have like a hook anchor question that you're going to help the interviewee shine, like with the last questions. And I also do tell people, some people are like, well, but then how do I get in and out of my Q&A? So if you're sitting there thinking, that sounds neat, but how would I do that? Sometimes what you can just do is just tease it. So if you are going to take Q&A, but not you're going to still come back with a strong close, doing something like, well, I'm sure in a room this size, there's a lot of questions. I'm going to pause for just a few months to answer that. And in just a moment, I'm going to come back and tell you the one thing that we can learn about Martin Luther King Jr. when it comes to having an iconic speech. You tease out whatever your ending is going to be. And so then, you know how sometimes people kind of like, oh, I think this is my bathroom break, or I'm going to drop off the Q&A because that moron asked a question about his Roth IRA conversion. Don't care. So if you've kind of teased out something you're coming back to, that can also kind of hold the energy and the intention through the Q&A as well. So in terms of your LinkedIn Live, still do it, but maybe make sure you have that crescendo.
Yeah,
close.
well, what we were finding was that the Q&A would lead to a place where sometimes it was just a very weak ending. And so we started putting a big idea at the very end. And it's really shifted some of the energy flow of the webinar to a better place. Speaking of which, Q&A, if anyone has some questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. I'll keep asking them. And we are going to end with kind of a bonus spark at the end as well. Kent, did you have another question?
Well, I wish I had about 3 hours with Eva. So
like I said, I can talk all day about talking. It's what I do.
yeah. So your speech needs spark. Yes. And you've talked about some ways to add spark. How do you know? What are some ways that as a speaker, I should be reading the room to notice where spark is present, where it's absent, so that I can effectively address it?
Great question. So I'm going to answer two-part. One is on the during the moment of speaking, and one is a practice you can do afterwards. So in the moment, if you feel like you're starting to lose audience engagement, and I would say we probably, if you've spoken to any length of time, this has probably happened to all of us at some point or another where you're like, oh, wow, people seem to be scrolling on their phone, or wow, a lot of people need to go pee during my presentation. So, a few things I would say. If you're losing interest, I think that one thing that can be really helpful for any of us as speakers is having a few back pocket jokes or ideas that you can pull. What I mean by that is they're not necessarily part of your presentation, but you could pull out if, like, let's even just say you're trying to use humor and it's not landing, having a back pocket humor line of, wow, I guess, my spouse not laughing at that joke was a good indicator it wouldn't work today. Oftentimes those lines can be funnier than your prepared line. Or, wow, I guess my presentation remote, just like my teenagers, does not want to listen to me today. Or, you have some of those, just kind of self-awareness goes a long way in speaking. And so even just having this self-awareness in the moment, if you feel like you're kind of like losing the audience attention and going, hey, you know what? I think I just lost you guys all there. You know what we're going to do? I'm going to take a moment to get a drink of water, and I want you guys to turn to each other, and maybe you have them interact for a moment to just gather your own thoughts of where you are in your content. I also, and I always tell clients, don't rely too heavily on videos or audio, because we've all had tech failures and you need to be able to give your presentation even if you have no slides. However, if you are giving a longer presentation, 30, 45, 60 minutes, integrating in two or three little pieces that are not you in the presentation, whether that is a video clip, whether that is an audience interaction where they're doing something that feels genuine, not forced. No one wants to high five the person next to them, but perhaps, doing something that's interactive component to give you as a speaker a little bit of a break to catch your thoughts, glance over the notes. For example, on my public speaking workshop I play a clip from The Office, and Michael Scott bombing it on stage gives me 45 seconds to just be like, whew, okay, how are we doing? We're doing good, and kind of resetting. So some of it, I would just say self-awareness goes a long way. We love speakers who are self-aware, who don't take themselves too seriously, who aren't getting too hyper, who, if there's a loud, construction crane moving this giant thing out the window that you're speaking to, pause and go, wow, my toddler's son would definitely think his job is cooler than mine right now. Just having that self-awareness of the moment that you are in goes a long way as a speaker. Following it, if persistently kind of have this thought of like, man, I just feel like my presenting is never quite like where I want it to be, or like it kind of feels like I start good. Doing a couple things. One, whenever possible, get a video of yourself speaking. And by video, I mean setting your iPhone on a chair to record, buying a cheap tripod, having somebody film it, but getting in the pattern of watching back your presentation. It is going to be insanely painful. We all hate the sound of our own voice. We all hate the way we show up on video. You're not going to like it. However, you will learn a lot about your speaking from watching yourself back. Maybe, for example, you do have this really distracting thing. Maybe you get talking really, really fast. Maybe you really are confusing from that second to third part where you felt like you were losing your audience. Like, what are you saying there? So watching yourself back can make a big difference. But one of the biggest, and I would say the most significant thing that you can do, is practice your content in front of real people prior to delivering it on a stage. You would not believe how many clients that I've worked with, even that make $40,000 a speaking gauge, 50,000, they have a new talk, and the first time they're delivering it is in front of a live audience. That should never be your first time delivering a new piece of content. Minimum, pull 2 or 3 people into a room a few days before your presentation and run it through. It's going to help you in your timing. They're going to be able to give you feedback. You might realize, like, wow, I have way too much content, just like Eva said. Or, wow, I thought that the exercise was going to take 4 minutes, and I think it's going to take like 8 or 9 with the size of the crowd. Whatever the scenario is, practice doesn't make perfect, because you don't want to be a perfect polished speaker. Practice makes confident. It makes you confident in your content, makes you confident in your delivery. I learned this firsthand when I was at Ramsey Solutions. I was at, this is probably 4 years ago now. I was on a team that had helped rewrite significant portions of Financial Peace University. And we'd rewritten, this is Dave Ramsey's flagship program. It's helping people get out of debt, save for the future, save for retirement, 8-week video, 8-week video curriculum. And we'd primarily rewritten it because there's 2 new speakers at the company that we were getting into the curriculum. As far as Dave's parts went, I mean, he had a few stat updates, like some new financial updates, but overall, this is literally content that he has been delivering for 30 years on stages, on his radio show. I mean, this is content that he knows inside and out. So it's the day before we're going to be filming it, and Dave suddenly is like at my desk, this large presence. He goes, "Eva, I'm going to need you to come down and I'm going to practice the content." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, it's probably gonna be like 30 minutes." And he proceeds for 6 hours to run through his content. And if he would say something he didn't like the way he said it, he would back up. If a slide, he didn't like the way the slide fired or the slide looked or a word that was on the slide, he would change it. If he didn't like the way he got out of a story and transitioned into this piece afterwards, he would take a run at it again. To me, it was extremely humbling, because I thought, wow, if anyone could mail it in, like Dave Ramsey could on this topic. It wasn't like it was this new speech. It was old content. And then even just last week, I saw the Golden Globes, Nikki Glasser. She gave the opening monologue. It was a 10-minute monologue for the Golden Globes, and she was quoted all over saying that she practiced it 93 times in front of other people. And no matter if you like her or not, no matter if you think she's funny or not, most people would agree that she nailed her opening. Why? Because she practiced in front of other people. And practice, it's like you don't want to do the wrong kind of practice. It's kind of like the golf swing. You don't want to spend hours and hours practicing the wrong way. You want to practice the right way. Well, what is the right way? A big differentiator is practicing in front of other people. So get in that pattern. Run your content through other people for feedback. Get their insights into it. That is going to be one of the biggest things that levels it up. Will you still get on stages sometimes and you practice in front of other people and they thought it was hilarious, and you get in front of people and they're like, deadpan, they're not laughing, the content feels weak? Yeah, sure, it happens to everybody, but your chances of success are going to be way higher if you've run it through people for feedback.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah. I'm going to ask everyone, hey, what's your top takeaway so far? I think we still might have there's another question out here that I want to ask, but if you want to drop it in the chat, what your top takeaway is so far, we'd love just to get some feedback and hear how you're applying what you've heard to maybe what you're going to do, maybe a current practice that you're going to change or modify, but what's your big takeaway thus far? Eva, we did have a question come in that asked, how can you apply storytelling to a very technical presentation? I think you started to allude to that, but can you expand on that for any of our...
Yeah, I love whoever asked that question, because sometimes when I talk about storytelling, people are like, that's great. I present a lot of data. I present a lot of graphs. I present a lot of there's not a lot of space for me to talk about what I learned about my, Labradoodle and how this applies to this. So one thing I always say is stories and stats and technical information, they tell stories too. Numbers tell stories too. When we look at a graph, it can tell a story. about like, well, why did Q3 do this or whatever. So even finding the story within the numbers, excellent book that I always recommend for people in the technical space, or if you're in a spot where you're regularly sharing numbers, maybe you're in marketing or something like that, is Making Numbers Count by Carla Starr and Chip Heath. It's an excellent book about just how do we make numbers more interesting. This is one of those ones where I'd recommend. I am a little old school, but I would recommend actually getting the hard copy because listening to the audio, there's a lot of numbers. So you want to like see the things they did. But one of the things, if you are regularly presenting like data like this, is even just going, okay, how do I tell a story? How are these numbers telling a story? Like what trends do we see? What kind of underlying message do I see in what I'm showing? And also, especially if you are giving a presentation, because sometimes we give presentations that really the expectation of the audience really is chart, graph, a lot on it. Is going, okay, but how, back to that order, how am I building these? What is like the one startling one that surprised me? So if you're looking at all this data, maybe some of you are just kind of presenting, but then can you build up to be like, and you guys, this one, I have to say, when I saw the Q3 numbers, I was shocked. Let's look at them together. I was shocked because I thought we were up here and we're down here, or whatever the thing is. But even pulling some of your own reflections in a story-based way onto that, like what are you taking away from all of these graphs, data, technical information, can make a really big difference. So for those that are more in the technical space where you're like, there is not a lot of space for humor, there's not a lot of space for storytelling, but there is still space to make things interesting and to make them build up to still tell a story of we're going to build up to this big thing, or we're going to start with a big thing and then we're going to trail down, but thinking through the order in which you're presenting it.
Okay. Some of the people prepare a collection of back pocket sparks. One of the top takeaways. So having those, never end a talk with Q&A. I think that's a good one. I made a note. Don't put too much content in. Go deeper. Go deeper is a good one. We have a what I'm going to call a bonus spark that I want to learn. But first, we're 10:44, a couple minutes left. I'm going to share screen one more time. Just some things we have coming up for the near future. 6 Type of Working Genius is a new service that we're offering here at Stroman and Associates. If you want a facilitator to come in and discover your genius as well as maybe your teams and how that all works together. Really good team building tool. So we have that. We also have the Asking Academy coming up. If you're in the nonprofit sector and you just could use some more money to fund your mission and want to do so in the most effective and easy way, we should be talking about the Asking Academy. Feel free to drop a line in the chat saying Asking Academy or Working Genius. And next month for our 47-minute webinar, we're having Andrew Olson, talk about driving change together, and going to focus on leadership there. So those are some things just coming up to put on your radar. But the bonus spark here, if I'm sure everyone's wondering, Eva, how can they work with you? Can they work with you? Is that possible? How can people work with you?
Well, I always say the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. So for any of you that I'm not connected with yet, send me a connection request. Again, if you've sent one before and I haven't taken it, it's not personal. Sometimes I get a little backlogged. So send me a connection request. I do work with individuals one-on-one to both develop the content and also work on the delivery side. I also work with teams and with companies and with groups to teach public speaking, either collectively as a group. Sometimes companies, they want to establish a keynote that everyone in their company can give and they want their own voice, or they just want to level up the speaking skills of their leadership team. And then I also periodically offer group coaching as well. I'll probably be starting another signature speech workshop coming in March. Maybe before then, LinkedIn will keep you posted. And then I do have a free lead magnet called 12 Questions You Must Ask for a Killer Speech. That's on my website at thespeakshop.com. I use this as my personal checklist on every talk I work on. Is just kind of like that final check of like, you think your speech is ready, but is it? So these are the 12 questions to ask. And when you do get that free lead magnet, you also get my weekly newsletter, which a lot of the content for anyone that does follow me on LinkedIn, a lot of the content you see me do in carousel starts in the newsletter. And then a month or two later, it'll roll down to LinkedIn. And it's a lot more robust because I clearly have a lot of words. I can't even get them all in a carousel. So now I have to do a newsletter. So I would love for you to sign up there as well.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I've been saving it for this, but there's a couple guys at the Stroman and Associates who would like to sign up for some service by Eva. So
I would love it. We can level you up more and more. We'll get Kent's stories all refined, and Aaron will figure out. We didn't even talk about all of your challenges today. So
I'm going
we've
to
got.
finish writing my manuscript. I'm about 40% done, but then I'm like, okay, I'm going to start there and then let Eva, or should I be talking to you even in the beginning stage?
Well, it goes both ways.
Right?
I have actually had the privilege in my life of several speeches that I've helped create turned into books, and I've also helped clients who have books that we then make a speech. I've seen it go both ways. When is the time to start working on your speech and public speaking? Now, today, as you leave here. That is the time to start working on it always. And I always tell people, you don't need a speech coach to start working on it. You have it within you right now of making that intentional choice that, wow, I'm going to learn about this. I'm going to start every day watching a TED Talk, or I'm going to read some books about public speaking, or wow, I'm going to follow even all these other handful of incredible speech coaches that are posting content on LinkedIn. So don't wait to get started. 2025 could be your year to really level up your public speaking skills.
All right. Well, thank you so much for generously sharing your wisdom with us. For everyone on the call or watching this post live on YouTube, hope this is helping your speech add a little spark to it. And if I would suggest working with Eva, she's fantastic. She'll take you to the next level. So, with that, God bless
Thank you
everyone.
guys so much. And I hope everybody has a great day. Oh, and can I give one last tip?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm like that person. Um, but one last tip is a lot of what you learn about public speaking applies to our virtual Zoom calls as well. So one tip for all of you, set your computer 18 inches to 24 inches away from you so that people can still see your hand and hand gestures, because we believe people more when we can see their hands. So not just in that first minute, but throughout. So there you go.
Fantastic. Great tip.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.